Hi, and welcome back to episode 23 of TLDR, the CISPA podcast. In case you're tuning in for the first time and are wondering who we are, CISPA is a German research institution within the Helmholtz Association, and we're researching all aspects of information security and AI. We are located in the beautiful Saarland, not far from the French border. You might have heard of the expression TLDR before, being short for too long didn't read. That's exactly the point of our podcast. We want to save you the hassle of reading long research papers yourself by talking to our researchers and getting them to explain their complex work in a way that you can get a glimpse of it without having to be a cybersecurity expert. My name is Tobias Ebelshäuser from CISPA's Communications Department, and today we're going to talk all about email security and why it's important to second guess who a suspicious email is really from. Our guest is Dr. Ben Stock, tenured faculty at CISPA researching all things related to web security. Together with one of his master students, he ventured into email security for his latest co-authored paper that will be presented at the 32nd Usenix Security Symposium, starting on August 9th, along with 29 other papers with CISPA involvement. If you're listening to this episode directly after release, keep your eyes peeled on our social media channels in the next days to get some insights into this year's conference and CISPA's 30 papers. But now, enough talking by me. Let's welcome our guest. Hi, Ben. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Tobias. Great to be here. Thanks.
Ben, let's dive right in. You're heavily involved in teaching in cooperation with the Saarland University. And as I've already mentioned, Birk Blechschmidt, your paper's main author, is your former master's student. For people looking to go into cybersecurity, what would you say are the merits of specializing on cybersecurity early on in your studies?
All right. So Birk actually was a student of our bachelor's in cybersecurity. And I think one of the key selling points of that study course is the fact that you start with information security from day one. So while you do get a fundamental kind of introduction to computer science, as all the other students of computer science get at Saarland University, you really, again, from day one, look into topics of cryptography, network security, and among other things, also email security. And so this specialization really allows you to have 3 years where you already deep dive into this topic, find a bachelor thesis, continue potentially with your master. And as the case for Birk now, well, write your master thesis and make this into a full-blown Tier 1 paper.
Tier 1, which means?
Yes, so Tier 1 is a kind of science lingo. In information security, there are 4 major conferences, which we refer to as the Tier 1 conferences, that are 3 months apart every year. And these are the ones that we typically target with most, if not all, of our research.
And this paper, which is called, I'm going to read this, Extended Hello, a comprehensive large-scale study on email confidentiality and integrity mechanisms in the wild. As I and you already said, it will be presented by you and Birk at Usenix this year. Can you tell us a little about why these conferences are so important to the research community?
Okay, so these big 4 conferences, they've been around for, 30 plus years, IEEE Security and Privacy even for 40 years. And these have kind of been established themselves as the premier venue where essentially every researcher that wants to know what is the latest and greatest research in information security will go to. And therefore, if you've been there, you've seen great papers, then obviously your goal as a student is also to publish at these venues. And so this is the biggest community gathering that we have, these 4 conferences, and that's where most of the information exchange happens, I would say.
Okay. So you go there and you leave with fresh ideas for new corporations and for new papers, basically.
Exactly. So when I think back to when I was a PhD student, when I went to these conferences, I was in awe, right? So such great research. And I was this very unimportant person there sitting and trying to kind of listen to everything and be like a sponge to take everything home and then squeeze it out of me when I get back home to have new ideas. And naturally, when you have been there a couple of times, and I've been doing this for, 10 plus years now, you change your perspective a little bit. And now it's much more about actually finding the next generation, like people like me from 10 years ago, talking with them about their ideas and hopefully being inspirational in some sense to them, plus also develop some ideas. But I mean, in all honesty, I manage a research group primarily these days. So having ideas is something that I primarily leave out to my PhD students, and I help them in achieving them.
Right. And maybe you can even find new PhD students.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds awesome. So, but for those of us not lucky enough to visit Usenex conference this year, can you give us a TLDR, a very short TLDR of what your paper is about before we dive really deep into the specifics?
So this paper is, as you mentioned earlier, about email security. And email security is something that kind of concerns everybody all the time without the vast majority of people noticing this. And as you were saying earlier, my primary research area is web security. And if you think about the web today, every single website that you will visit will have an encrypted connection between the client and the server, such that nobody can read the messages that you're posting or the passwords that you're posting and so on. And for email security, this is very different because, well, for email security, you typically submit your emails to the server that will then pass it on. And the first hop from you to that server is encrypted. You have no control what happens afterwards, right? So this is kind of the confidentiality part about emails, which is something that I've always been interested in also in terms of teaching that I do from the very first semester. But we wanted to kind of do a really comprehensive analysis of both, well, confidentiality, such that nobody can look into my emails. But at the same time, I think we've all received emails from somebody claiming to be my bank or my boss and urgently wanting something from us.
Yeah.
And the question is like, why can anybody just pretend to be my boss or my bank, right? And that's where the authenticity question comes in for emails. And this is why we got started on this project. Birk was looking for a master's thesis. I said, yeah, sure, email security, let's have a look at this. And yeah, did a cool paper there.
Okay, so maybe let's start with the integrity part. You've mentioned phishing emails. I mean, as you said, I'm sure we've all received them. But maybe let's go into detail on what the sender line actually means, because sometimes you can just read, okay, it's this is from your bank. And then you click on it and you see it's some gibberish email, right? And I mean, you don't have to be that careful because you think, okay, well, my bank is not going to write from me from a Russian email, and yeah, and it's fairly clear. But sometimes these actually look very real because sometimes it's, I don't know, at Sparkasse.de. Of course, there are other banks, but it's just an example. How does this work? How can someone apparently send an email from somewhere they don't have access to?
So let me try and explain this with an analogy. Imagine that you get a letter from somebody, right? In a letter, you can typically see your address where this is being sent to. And then sometimes on the envelope of the letter, it says where this is coming from, right? But this is kind of optional. And then you open up the letter and you look inside and then you see, it's coming from Sparkasse, right? But that actually means that you have two ways in which the sender is identified. One is the one on the envelope and one is the one on the message itself, right? On the letter itself.
Yeah.
And essentially, if we talk about emails and email security, the only thing that my Outlook or Thunderbird or whatever I'm using as a mail client is showing me is this sender from the inner message. So it doesn't tell me who's the actual kind of sender on the envelope. And effectively, there are in email security these two different things. And basically, for all intents and purposes, anybody can send an email on anybody's behalf and just claim, sure, I am the email server responsible for CISPA.de. Here's an email from direct@CISPA.de. You are fired or something like this, right? And this is where essentially certain security mechanisms in email security come in, which make sure that as the owner of CISPA.de, you have some way of saying, if somebody accepts a mail that says it's coming from CISPA.de on the inside, it should also say this on the outside envelope, and then check, does this outside envelope actually come from somebody that I trust, right? So is this coming from the correct mailman that is delivering the CISPA mail, rather than just somebody who snuck a letter into my inbox.
So basically there should be a check between the two sender addresses, the one on the letter or the message itself and the one on the email as a whole.
Yes, essentially, yes, because again, the only thing that is being displayed in my email program is this inside sender, but many security mechanisms work on this outside sender, on this envelope from sender. And that's where kind of a disparity comes into, like, who's actually sending the message and who's pretending to be sending the message.
Okay. And how can this be? Is there a way to ward yourself from receiving these emails or from sending? I mean, if you're the owner of a domain, can you do something that no one else can send emails on your behalf?
Exactly. So there's a mechanism which is called Sender Policy Framework, which already alludes to what it's supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
And here the idea is that if I am the operator of CISPA.de, I can, kind of simply speaking, publish a list of mail servers that is allowed to send emails on my behalf. And by definition, if I publish this list, then anybody, like any other server that is trying to send emails on my behalf that is not on the list should then be blocked from sending emails from that domain. And that's really something that is a mechanism that has been around for 15, 20 years already. Hasn't really caught up too much in practice, which is also some of the research that we did here is because of this, right? Because otherwise email security would be mostly solved. And yeah, that's essentially, as I said, like an allow list approach, where I can, if, and that's the big if, all mail servers support this mechanism, then I can publish this list. Because if I just publish this list and nobody looks at this list, then yeah, it's kind of pointless to publish it.
So if I'm an evil person wanting to imitate someone and I say, okay, well, but I am the director at CISPA, and I send an email, and even if CISPA is doing everything right, my mail server has to also comply with these rules, and otherwise nothing happens?
Exactly. So assume that the fake director sends me an email to my private email address, and my mail server does not do this SPF, so it's Sender Policy Framework check. Then it's just going to say, okay, there's an email which is coming from director at CISPA. It's coming from mail.attacker.com, but I don't understand if this is allowed or not, so I'll just accept that email. Okay. And importantly, for the victim who then gets that email, it's not clear, at least not easily visible, like who was sending this email, right? Then in your Outlook, you have to like right click on the email, view options, need to understand all the technical headers that are in the email. But there's no easy way to tell, oh, no, this looks like it's fishy.
Okay, so there is actually no way to completely ward yourself against someone imitating you or your email address?
Unfortunately, not. Because it always means that whoever is receiving that email, their mail server must implement all these checks. And if that doesn't happen, right, then effectively you don't gain any security. And like looking again at the web, imagine if browsers wouldn't force secure connections. If they would just say, well, it's HTTP, it's plain text, it's fine by me, right? Then nobody would implement HTTPS because why would they? There's no benefit, right?
HTTPS costs extra because you have to pay for certificates and
yes. So there's some added overhead for the certificates potentially, or computational cost or whatever. But the browsers have taken this stance that unencrypted connections are really bad.
Which you might have noticed whenever you have visited some page that had an invalid certificate and you were told to leave this website immediately, and you can only pass with an admin password and so on. So it's really tough to
Exactly. Yeah. Because like looking like 10 years, we had in browsers, we had this green indicator. It's like, hey, this is secure connections, this is a good thing. And nowadays it's just a black indicator. So it doesn't give you a positive sign if it's HTTPS. But if it's unencrypted, it's going to be like a red warning. It's like, don't enter passwords here, and so on. So browsers really do a lot to force HTTPS on the entire web.
So it went from extra security to being the absolute standard, and otherwise...
Yes, it's kind of extra insecurity now if you have HTTP only. And that's where email security differs so much, because you also have millions of mail servers, right, that can handle incoming email for whatever domains. Whereas with browsers, you have whatever, 3, 4, 5 big ones, where it's much easier to implement this change. And we, in our study, actually not looked at millions of mail servers. We obviously can't, right? But Birk registered accounts on, I think, 46 different mail providers, big mail providers, T-Online, for example, one of them, Gmail, and so on. And we checked whether they would actually look up this Sender Policy Framework entry to just see, it's like, okay, if now somebody claiming to be director at CISPA.de sends an email to a Gmail address, would they actually check this entry? And it turns out, unfortunately, well, one of those two that I just mentioned does not do it, and it's not Gmail.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. So maybe getting back to that paper, you did a comprehensive check of a lot of email providers, as you've just mentioned. What is the general result of that? Are you as someone who might be able to kind of rate that? Are you happy with what the email providers are doing, or could it be better?
It could be much better. So the standard policy framework is the one thing, right? There are other mechanisms that relate to this, one being called DMARC, another one being called DKIM. And we also saw that those are not necessarily properly implemented. So even if, again, CISPA-DE is properly configured, many major mail providers will not make these additional checks, which means still people can fake emails coming seemingly from CISPA.de. So that's half of the problem when we talk about the integrity and authenticity of emails. The other part is also about the confidentiality. So here we actually saw that all mail providers, if I remember correctly, that we looked at, if they send an outgoing email somewhere and that other side says, no, sorry, I do not support encryption, like for the transport between mail server to mail server, they just say, all right, it doesn't support encryption, we'll send the email anyways.
Okay.
And if you think about somebody who is in a position to, well, not only eavesdrop on traffic, but manipulate traffic, right? We've all heard about Mr. Snowden and his findings from a couple of years ago. So you can assume that there are parties out there that will be able to intercept traffic, change traffic. Whenever I now try to send, my mail server tries to send your mail server an email, if there's somebody in the middle who just says, no, Tobias's mail server doesn't support encryption, and my mail server then sends that email in plain text, there you go, GCHQ and NSA will now be able to look at the emails. And this is really a big problem in my mind, because it means, we are communicating in plain text. And again, considering the types of emails that we exchange, right? This might be confidential research projects. This might be my bank notifying me about something, whatever you can imagine, right? Password recovery emails for your Amazon account, right? If all of these things go unencrypted over the network, somebody can, look into those, and in the Amazon password recovery case, just take that recovery link and log into your account then.
Okay. So if I usually write an email without adding any thought into it, it's not encrypted. Exactly.
So when we talk about encryption, we always need to think about, so how can I encrypt in a way that the other side can decrypt that email, right? And typically, and this goes back to first lecture in the first semester of the students, right? There are two ways of doing this. Symmetric encryption, where the two people communicating have agreed on a shared secret up front. But that doesn't really scale if you think about billions of people writing billions other people emails potentially, right? So that doesn't work.
Yeah.
The other thing is asymmetric cryptography or asymmetric encryption, where I can publish what is called a public key. And you can use that public key to encrypt an email to me, and only I, with my private key, can open that email again, right?
Okay.
Nobody else in the world can. And everybody who wants to communicate in an encrypted way just has to publish their public key. But that's not the default. So when you register for an email account on gmail.com, it doesn't say, hey, here is your SMIME or OpenPGP key.
Yeah.
This is something that you need to do on top.
Okay.
And naturally, within CISPA, we have this. But this is not something that the average citizen or average email user will have. Therefore, by default, if I open my my Outlook, send an email to a student, right? By default, that's going to be unencrypted.
But the connection can still be encrypted between the mail servers?
The connection between the mail servers can, and in my mind should, still be encrypted. Then it's a different type of threat model. If we think about two mail servers who are both benign, so they don't want to look into your emails beyond what they're required to do, then just having transport encryption between those two mail servers is fine. Right. So this is essentially, you trust them. You trust your postman to not open your mails.
Yeah.
Right. Because you have an envelope around it. And you can imagine that the postman driving that email from the post office to your house, right, in his car, that's the transport encryption. So it's protected from anybody looking in. If the postman becomes malicious and opens your mail, there's nothing you can do. Right. If I encrypt my email, then I put essentially my envelope in a box that is locked that even the postman can't open. So then it doesn't matter if it's transported in plain text or in an armored car, nobody can look inside.
Or the message is so jumbled that you just can't make any sense of it.
Exactly. It makes no sense to them then. Yeah.
But assuming both servers do encrypt the transport, then a third party will also not be able to read the text or the email or the image without any further without any further work. Let's put it like that.
Exactly. So if we have this transport encryption, again, which is HTTPS, right? That's transport encryption.
Yeah.
If we have the equivalent between mail servers, nobody can look into that traffic, and therefore nobody can see that email inside. Exactly.
Okay. But how does it look in the wild, as you've put it in your paper?
Yes.
Does the majority of email servers support that encryption, or? So
effectively, I maybe need to kind of go quickly back to the web to explain this. Mm-hmm. On the web, if you go to sparkasse.de, but the certificate that your browser gets back is for attacker.com, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to get like a red warning saying, no, attacker.com does not match sparkasse.de. Mm-hmm. And that is saying there is a potentially valid certificate here, but it's not valid for the domain that you wanted to talk to, right? So your browser will say, no, I'm not going to connect to this.
Okay.
And the same actually applies when two mail servers speak to each other. So let's say I'm a delivering mail server, I'm sending an email to you. Then I effectively connect to you and say, hey, can you please give me your certificate, right? But now you have a certificate that is not tobias.de, but it's example.com, right? Mm-hmm. So what I should do in terms of security now is to say, I should not deliver any emails to you because you do not own the certificate for tobias.de. It turns out, however, this very simple check is not implemented or intentionally not done by all of the mail providers that we tested. Mm-hmm. So even if you present me a certificate that does not match your name, that has expired in the past, or even a certificate where we just claim, no, I don't support email encryption, all providers that we tested will still deliver that email to you. And that's really a big problem. And so we then ask ourselves, okay, so why does this happen? Why are these mail servers so functionality oriented? Because for me as a security person, it's not that hard to get a certificate. It's actually, you can get it for free for mm-hmm. any host name, and you can automate getting a new certificate. So everything is super easy these days. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of looked at the top 10 million domains, tried to figure out if they have an email server. And we found that actually a pretty significant fraction, I think 30% or so of the mail servers, when asked for a certificate, give us back something that is either invalid or expired or anything like this, right? So that is to say, 1 in 3 mail servers does not actually properly offer this encryption support. So I can see why Gmail and others will then say, okay, we have to deliver emails. We can't just say security first. We need to do functionality first, because otherwise we would break a third of the email traffic that is outgoing. So I think that's a big problem, but there's also hardly any incentive for whoever is operating the domain to change it, because they receive emails, right? Yeah. So that's where kind of the crux is coming from in this ecosystem.
That basically sounds like an sort of unfixable problem for email as standard.
That's an excellent point. I'm wondering if people 10 years ago thought that having everything encrypted on the web was impossible because certificates cost a lot of money, and people said, yeah, it's not worth it because I'm just running whatever, a shop that just has my opening hours on the website. But again, today everybody's like, yeah, of course we have HTTPS everywhere. The big problem here is the ecosystem is so vast and everybody can operate their own mail server that this gets very tough to do, to kind of have this very drastic change in the ecosystem. One thing I could imagine is that if you have, if you're Gmail and you're listening, then maybe have an option for every user to say, I want my emails to only be delivered if proper encryption is available, right?
Okay.
Because the vast majority of people will not understand their start TLS certificate mismatch name, right? Nobody's going to understand this. However, if I am security aware, I can say, yes, I'm fine with these emails not getting delivered. And for everybody else, we can maybe stick with the insecure way of handling this. And I mean, the other solution to this problem is, in particular for the individual, right? If you are the recipient of potentially confidential emails, you should not actually rely on mail servers properly encrypting end-to-end or mail server to mail server, but instead do end-to-end encryption. So get your own SMIME certificate. You can also get those for free these days. Publish it on your website, send it to your contacts, and then make sure that they encrypt the emails when they send them to you. Because again, right, with the postman example, like you can have arbitrarily malicious people on the way. If the letter is locked in a box, nobody's going to be able to look inside.
But that would, of course, only work for people you can actually talk to, not to like automated mails coming from your bank or whatever. I mean, those typically do not include confidential data in the email, but still.
It could to that extent where if I register for my bank account or something, right, I need to give them my email address somehow. And I can also update my email address in the web interface of my bank, right? The bank could just add another field, say, here, upload your SMIME certificate, and then implement on their side that if a certain customer has such a certificate, then make use of this to encrypt the email that is outgoing. I understand this is a lot of hassle. Yeah. But still, this is, I think, the only way that we can have meaningful security in the email domain in the long run, because, again, the ecosystem is way too fast. So everybody is kind of on their own on this one.
So email was basically built without a lot of security in mind?
I think a lot of things were built without security in mind, which makes my job very fascinating, to be honest.
And it makes sure you never run out of work.
That's also true, yes. So I appreciate that in some sense, but also from a security researcher point of view, it's a bit frustrating to see that there's not much you can do, because there exist a lot of mechanisms that in theory solve this problem. It's just that everybody needs to pull in the same direction for this to properly work. And email might be, in that respect, a bit of a lost cause. And maybe in the long run, this is also not the solution for secure communication. But I think also if you really want to communicate securely,
there are ways
to do this.
Yeah, right. So your tip for someone wanting to communicate securely would be either use asymmetric encryption with a public key or don't use email at all.
You cannot use email to communicate in a confidential manner unless you have this end-to-end encryption. Yeah. And essentially the point is you should not have to trust anybody on the way to not be malicious. And the only way that you can do this is with end-to-end encryption, so SMIME or PGP.
So, but your personal opinion, will email stick around the way it is, or will it change fundamentally? Will there be a lot of changes, or will these changes be implemented in the future?
I mean, let's face it. We are in Germany, where a fax is considered safe enough to have like business transactions.
Yeah, especially if you think about football.
So there's a lot of super legacy old technology which is used. But so I can't send my bank cancellation as a signed PDF. But if I print that signed PDF and I stick it into the fax machine, then all of a sudden it's fine.
Yeah,
right. Which sounds very wrong, to be honest. But I think in that light, email is not going to go away. People will continue to communicate via email. And if we can do something to improve the security for some, that's great. But I think I've come to realize it's going to be very hard to do this at a large scale for everybody.
All right. I think I have one last question when it comes to this integrity part. If you are able to fake that header very well so it looks like it's coming from a different person, a lot of experts are warning right now that phishing emails will only get worse in the very near future when we think of large language models like ChatGPT. Do you think there's like a phishing epidemic coming?
So I think the large language models, they help with creating messages that don't look badly faked. Right? But I think the most efficient phishing emails are not necessarily just those that are well written, But if I think this email looks weird, I will look at kind of some indicators. Like, okay, what does the from say? Right? This is actually my bank. Okay, that sounds interesting. Then if my bank sends me an email, they know my name usually, right? If they just start with dear customer, that's going to make me question this email a little bit already, because having my information is kind of serving as a trust anchor. So I know they know something about me, which makes me more inclined to trust that incoming email. Having said that, though, that's also not a perfect way of ensuring that the message has not been faked. Because I think 15 years ago or so, there was a compromise on eBay, and there was some data that was stolen. And I, to this day, get emails with my name, my date of birth, and a very, very old address where I was living when I was studying for my bachelor's degree.
Okay.
But the phishers use this information. And I think if such a data breach occurs, then it's much more likely that you have high quality phishing emails combined with these large language models. Then it really becomes dangerous, right? But I don't think that the LLMs will make that big of a difference on phishing as a whole. I think, users need to be aware of these threats and these dangers. Maybe phishing emails become a little bit better written than before. I find it interesting then to look at if this changes the ecosystem or not. So it's actually a nice idea. I'll write this down as a next master's thesis for the next student to publish at Usenix Security 2024, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Let's check out the deadline, and then he has to hurry up probably. Okay, thank you very much, Ben, for this insight into a topic that is also not your usual daily work. I still have a few quick questions for you at the end. I'm going to start with the one that we usually put second, but I think it fits very well with today's topic. Have you ever fallen for a phishing email?
Not for a phishing email, but for a spoofed email. I once believed that I received an email from somebody who was a session chair at a conference, just asking me, can you switch with the previous speaker? And it turns out this was a student of mine who, as part of a course that we taught at the time, had a task of spoofing an email and making one of the team from the chair fall for it. And I fell for that. So I did.
Okay. I hope he or she got a good grade.
Absolutely, yes.
Very well. Nice. Do you use a password manager?
Yes. I think I know 2 passwords. One to unlock my computer and one to unlock the password manager. Okay.
Is there a specific reason why you've chosen to do that?
So if anybody listening to this who's taking my lecture next in the winter term, password security, so you have to assume that somebody will compromise websites. And every time I reuse a password, that means the attacker can now maybe access other accounts. And the best solution for this problem is just to have a password manager where I don't have to know any of my passwords. So I also can hardly be phished, actually, because if I don't know a password, how would I enter it in the first place?
That's true. Yeah. All right. As a cybersecurity researcher, do you handle your private data differently? So are you wary of sharing things on social media or writing emails?
Writing emails, no. Sharing things on social media, probably yes. So I do have 2 kids, and there's a very clear red line between my kids and social media. However, having 2 kids in school, I am part of WhatsApp groups, as you have to be. And that concerns me a little bit, but not to a point where I would say I should stop using this or must convince everybody to use Signal instead, because that's a losing battle, I hope. Or I fear, not I hope.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you don't, so you should probably just not share all that confident material on that
exactly.
WhatsApp chat.
Yes.
Are you a fan of smart home devices?
I think the only smart thing that I have in my home is my vacuum cleaner. That's the end. And when we built our house, we intentionally opted not to have anything smart.
Okay. So you have like an automatic vacuum cleaner that...
Yes, so it's a vacuum robot.
Exactly.
That I can check out and start from anywhere in the world. but only not because I wanted to have an IoT thing, but rather because these robots don't come without a web interface or an app anymore these days.
Yeah, right. Okay. And last one, how do you feel about cryptocurrencies, which is probably not at all in your field of work, but
badly is the answer.
Okay. We don't have to go any deeper into it.
I try to stay away from this. I don't see that there is a big benefit in cryptocurrencies. Others might disagree with me. I'll stick to euros and US dollars in payments.
All right. So Ben, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us, and have fun at the Usenix conference. And looking forward to what ideas will come from this year's conference.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.